because I for sure knew that like my parents would probably stop talking to me. They would probably deport me back. They would take my passport. I knew they were capable of doing any of those things. Constantly being held against these rules and regulations. But really, at the end of the day, it was just all about control of my mobility and where I went. And then you kind of see, like in Saudi Arabia, you couldn't travel without male guardians. And I think there's still that culture there. We actually like experience these in our own homes too. There's like Islamic regimes, but they're in our homes and in our countries. It's almost like you grow up really feeling like really fragile. Anything you do, any move you make is being watched by Allah. You are being held to this entity. He's basically sitting there grading everything that you're doing. And that eventually there's going to be like some final, you're going to fail it. What kind of life is this that it's not even worth living? Like if I have to just do everything that they're telling me to do, or if I have to do everything that the Quran says, what's the point of me even having any sense of consciousness? I'm so done being scared. I'm so done being controlled. And part of that is me taking my mask off. And so,
Wait, hold on. Would this be kind of like a coming out video?
yeah, if any of my family members end up watching this, hi.
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on a podcast app and you would like to see our face, we would love it if you went to our YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness, where you can join in on the conversation, do all the YouTube-y things. We love it when you like, subscribe. Of course, leaving those comments means a lot to our guests. It means a lot to us, and it boosts the algorithm. So today's guest, we were connected to her through Apostate Aladdin, and we're very excited to talk about her. She has a beautiful Instagram page where she has all of these illustrations and drawings that really are supposed to help bring people together from the ex-Muslim community to create that community, a safe space to deconstruct. So thank you so much for joining us, Haram Doodles.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
So nice to be here.
Did I pronounce it right?
You did.
Okay. I totally said it wrong initially. I was like, Haram Doodles. And she's like, no. In the kindest way possible. I'm like, this makes more sense.
Not doodles from the harems.
Yeah. So, yes, we're going to talk all about why you created this page and what it's done for you. But of course, I want to get your whole backstory first. So, you grew up in the States. Today, we're going to be talking about a little bit of a different perspective than we've had so far in the show, which is there's such a huge gradient when practicing any religion, right? And Islam is so big. There's so many different sects and so many different ways to practice. And so today we're going to get a glimpse into your life, into what it was like growing up in the US in a semi-strict household, what that meant, kind of towing the line of here we follow the rules and here it's a little bit more lenient, and what it still means, though, to leave that behind and all the ramifications there. So let's start with your childhood, where you grew up, and kind of how you were raised.
Yeah, so my childhood was pretty much all of it was spent in the US. I was, kind of bopped around the Middle East and South Asia. My family's from South Asia as well. And so it really, growing up, it was as if it was like a Muslim bubble living in the US. Really, I was not allowed to hang out with my white friends or my Christian friends or my Jewish friends or my Hindu friends. It really just, I had to hang out with either my cousins or if I found some Muslim friends. And so there's a little bit of a control there too in terms of who I was actually spending time with. Life in the US was really interesting because I think the minute my parents came here, I think oftentimes with immigrant parents, they feel like there's a sense of loss of, they feel like they're losing their religion, losing like a sense of the culture that they're coming from. And so they end up like a lot of parents, and even my parents included, sort of doubled down on religion and on culture. So culture meaning like the ethnic culture that we were coming in with, and then, religion and its own culture too. Whether it was praying 5 times a day, that was always sort of something that we had to do, even though we tried to find ways not to do it. And every day after coming home from school, I would have to sit with my mom and read the Quran. And as a kid, I was still learning how to read Arabic. And being a second language, it's really hard to just read it and you don't understand anything. You're just practicing how to read it. And so, but because it is so closely related to Persian and Urdu, the languages are pretty easy to like pick up just in reading. And so really a lot of our lives for us that are non-Arabs, we spend it trying to like literally just read the Quran in Arabic because we're told that's a sacred language that it's in and that
Mhm.
Allah gave us that book and gave it through Muhammad in that sacred language. So reading it in our own language isn't as good as reading it in Arabic. You get a sense of that colonization, the Arabization from off the jump, really. You don't, I mean, obviously, I didn't call it that at that time, but now that I reflect on it, I'm like, wow, it was like the sudden wave of Arabization that happens as you start to grow up because everything's like, okay, you need to learn how to read Arabic. You need to understand it better and you need to look into it more. So there's a lot of this sort of yes, me reading it with my mom, but then also being told to look into these words, translate them, read them better, right? So there's a little bit of a strict environment around just even reading the Quran itself or praying 5 times a day. As a kid, I think I was like maybe 8, going to school here, you're learning about solar systems and dinosaurs. And to be honest, like dinosaurs, I think just kind of blew my mind. I also got a tattoo of a dinosaur now
Aw.
for that reason. But at that time, I was actually sitting with my mom and reading the Quran, and she was like, I know we are going through some verse, and I just randomly stopped her and I was like, hey, so why aren't dinosaurs in the Quran? And she said, you don't like, she just kind of like stopped and didn't know what to say, I think. And so she was like, you don't ask questions, and whatever's in the Quran, that's it. You're not going to question any of it. You're not going to ask anything that's like outside of the realm of whatever's written in it. And so I was like, but it's such a big thing. There's fossils, there's years of evidence that they actually existed. And she was like, nope, you do not ask questions. Whatever's in this book is in it, and everything else you ignore. So I just, in my little kid brain, I was like, I, I don't know if I'm going to fail science now because I have to ignore the dinosaurs, or I feel like in that moment, there's some sort of a seed of doubt that got planted because that answer wasn't enough for me.
Yeah. I think everyone kind of got tripped up with the dinosaurs, every religion, I mean, because same with Mormonism. I want to say it's right in the Book of Mormon or one of the teachings, and I should know the exact place. Sorry, I'm a bad ex-Mormon, but it said
All
that
good.
the earth is 6,000 years old. And so everyone's like, well, what about the dinosaurs? And eventually they came up with an apologetic response, which was, well, no, when God created the earth, he pulled things from other planets and just like shot them down into the ground. And we're like, what? So these are like alien dinosaurs? But I didn't even know that was a thing growing up because it was never brought up in my childhood. I didn't learn that I wasn't supposed to believe in dinosaurs until way after I left Mormonism. And that's why if you ask a Mormon today, do you believe in dinosaurs? They're like, duh, because they don't know they're not supposed to.
Right.
It's such a funny thing that everyone's like, whoops, no one knew about the dinosaurs, some prophets. Anyway,
Yeah. It's interesting because you hear, I've heard random things like, well, I think it's a conspiracy, or
the dinosaurs
we don't
are a
really know if they,
conspiracy.
yeah, yeah, like we don't really know if they found the fossils. And it's like, no, there's like
Entire dinosaur
a
fossil,
lot.
the whole
No,
thing
exactly.
re put together.
Right. Exactly. I
Oh,
don't know if people have enough time to sit there and actually create dinosaur fossils to like
yeah.
put them together in the museums. But really, I think that really did set off this sort of just innate curiosity. And I honestly have to give myself a pat on the back for not backing away from the curiosity and also just kind of leaning into it. And I think I had enough, going to a public school in the US, you have enough of an environment around you that there's different people, there's different things that you're learning. And I think I really wanted to learn more about the American culture. And so I was reading a lot of books and I was spending a lot of time at the library. And I think that's really how I was able to just go, okay, there's this one part of my brain that has to live this Muslim life, but I think there's this other part that wants to discover more outside of this bubble that I'm in. And so it was just trying to find ways to not be in a Muslim environment. And so whether that meant I had to lie and be at a library, lie that I had some after school thing going on, just so I could get away and kind of do my own thing. And whether that was like hanging out with friends, which is such a innocent thing, but even that was seen as Who are you with? Why are you hanging out with these other people?
Mm,
And so hearing even that, right, like the othering of anyone that wasn't Muslim.
yeah.
And so I think that really just, and I continue to question that because I was just like, I have this amazing friend who happens to be gay. Is he really going to go to hell? And why am I so special that I'm automatically apparently going to heaven just because I'm Muslim? But this guy who is such a sweet person, and just because his sexual orientation is not heterosexual, he's going to be going to hell for it. And he's living a life of sin. And so just, yeah, there's so many instances where I just like that cognitive dissonance where you're just kind of stuck in that and you're like, how do I think about this? What do I think about this?
Yeah.
And also being really scared to think even that, oh, this was a nice person because apparently you're told, they're not nice people.
Hmm. So, in your particular household, if you were to break one of those rules, if you were caught hanging out with friends who weren't Muslim, what would be the ramifications? Were there physical punishments? Was it more of a guilt and a shame? What was that like for you?
It was definitely guilt and shame, not being allowed to go out anymore, just being kind of stuck in the house. Nope, you're not going to go anywhere. Physical punishment wasn't that big of a thing unless like I did something that like wrecked the car or something. So, but it was a lot of just guilt tripping and shaming to the point where it was like, well, you're going to be going to hell, so we can't really do anything about it. So it's like we're trying to help you, but if you're not going to listen, then like
Mm,
kind of like shit out of luck. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm shit out of luck.
wow.
Because
Yeah.
one way take hell.
That actually brings up something in my brain. So, in my Mormon upbringing, we had to do a lot of repenting. So, we would have to go to the bishop and confess our sins and then go through this
Mm.
whole repentance process. Did you have anything similar where if you did something wrong, you had to fix it somehow?
Yeah, so we didn't have anything where we'd I think there are parents that might take their kids to the imam to like talk to them and, put some like sense into the children. But for me, I think it was more of the opposite where my parents basically just told me to pray harder and pray more and pray to Allah that He wasn't gonna like roast me forever in hell. And so it was more of that where it was just being pressured into continuously praying more or
Mm,
reading the Quran more and like being guilted to a point where I was just this constant like you start to live with this constant fear. And I think that really kind of the control aspect of that is really just debilitating because you start to approach everything in life as like, I'm scared to do this. And so I think I started to notice that too, where I was just kind of scared of everything. It's
yeah.
almost like you grow up really feeling like really fragile and feeling like anything you do, any move you make is being watched by Allah. And so, that's a really hard thing because it's like, okay, in physical form, like you might not be controlled by these shackles or being tied somewhere or like, but you actually do feel that from like the sort of, I don't know, spiritual perspective or the God's perspective that apparently you are being held to this entity that's gonna definitely like he's basically sitting there grading everything that you're doing. And that eventually there's gonna be like some final, you're gonna fail it. So
Yeah.
it's just like being in school and going through that, it's so hard because it's like you're already taking tests. And then you're like, shit, now I gotta worry about this too.
Right.
I have a math test, but I have to worry about this other test, this big thing.
I imagine it would be really hard because you're not in an environment that other people are going through the same thing necessarily. You're in a completely
Right.
different world. And so you have that added layer of making sure you're doing everything right. And self policing is such a real thing. It really can control someone. And the crazy thing is, they
Yeah.
usually don't even realize they're in a prison of their own mind until they've stepped out of it. And it takes a lot of deconstructing to get to that point. And it often creates a lot of
Yeah.
scrupulosity and religious OCD when it sounds kind of like what you were saying when you're like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? This constant fear and worry and praying extra hard, creating these tendencies of not just living because you're so afraid to just do anything.
Right. Yeah. And there's this constant like sort of second guessing yourself too through that too, because you're kind of like, is this going to upset Allah? Is this going to upset my
Mhm.
parents? Am I going against the religious sort of doctrine that I've been raised with? And really starting to, I don't think I questioned anything and just kind of accepted that this was my life until I think I got to college. That's
Mm,
when I really started to really sort of using this like outside in lens, whereas before I felt like I was just kind of on the inside and looking around.
yeah.
But I think really having that sort of, I started to study religion in college, and I think that really gave me sort of more of an objective understanding of just religion in general and religions across the world, right? So it wasn't just Islam. I was learning a little bit about Christianity, about Judaism, about Buddhism, about Hinduism. And so that really gave me a broader perspective. And also, it made me feel less special as a Muslim, which was really interesting because
Hmm.
I think that's when I started to realize that, like, yeah, like there's a bunch of gods. And who am I to say that my God is the perfect or the right one? So I think it started to help me like detach myself from Islam a little bit, just learning about religion very objectively. And we're not really taught objectively in our homes, right? It's always just our parents telling us what to do or a community telling us what to do. So,
Yeah. There is no objective. It's we are the right one, and you're so lucky to be born into this one true religion. So you better do all the things right because if you
exactly.
don't, you're just throwing away your golden ticket to heaven or wherever.
Yeah,
And so
right.
I want to talk more about what that was like because you mentioned it was hard going to school and having these rules, and then also just being in the US in this world that's completely different, or at least set up to be different. So, what was it like for you as a young teen trying to kind of live both worlds in a way?
Yeah, honestly, it was really difficult in the sense that, so I'll back up and say I know living in the US comes with a level of privilege for a lot of us that grow up Muslims because we're not growing up in our Muslim countries that have way more control because
Mm.
government is also based in Sharia law. And so that at least wasn't there. So I know that my life growing up in the US was definitely privileged. And also that even within that privilege were instances where not being allowed to wear shorts, dresses, even capris were a big deal because oh my god forbid my my ankles show,
Oh,
like it's gonna
wow.
apparently cause a ruckus outside, right? Like all the men are gonna like fall over. So um and not being able to wear sleeveless or even like really short sleeves, being told to wear, I had to cover up or wear traditional outfits or like wear a hijab if I was going to a mosque. The minute you step inside of a mosque, women have to be covered and they have to cover their heads. And so even in noticing the sexism, even within a mosque, you walk in and it's like, okay, all the women are praying behind men. All the women are covered. Men can just walk in with a t-shirt and jeans and it's
Oh.
totally fine. And noticing that at home too, it's like, okay, why is my dad always leading the prayers? Why can't I lead the prayer? Or why can't my mom lead the prayer? Even like innocent questions like that, right? Like even within that context, I was going, there's some level of sexism going on here. I didn't call it sexism, but I saw the difference. And really, I think at one point, one of my male cousins, he had said something like, oh yeah, in Islam, like men are allowed to marry four wives. And I was like, that's bullshit. In that moment, my brain said that's bullshit because I was like, Islam is such a great religion for women. It helps protect women. And like, this, I was going through that whole cognitive dissonance in my brain. But then I actually looked into the Quran and I found that verse and I was like, dang. So, like, it kind of crumbled a little bit of my trust in Islam, I think, in that moment, where it really just was like, okay, so this is actually written in the Quran, but it's really conditional. It's not like men can't just go around marrying four wives. There's other rules and government laws that help protect women. But that's really just us here in the US or
Mhm.
in maybe democratic countries. But there's polygamy is pretty common in other countries and even in the Middle East. And so I kind of was like drawing this line that, oh, yeah, this happens back home. This isn't really something that will happen in the US, but it does. And I think that really kind of, the minute I looked into the Quran about it, I think that's when I was like, okay, there's something going on here. There's something that's different. And I think once I got into college, and I almost in that moment, I let it go, even in my teenage years, because I was like, it's not a big deal. It was like back in the day. Like I kind of made excuses for it.
Mhm.
But I think once I got into college, started studying religion, started studying like topics like feminism and sociology and what does social justice mean and why do we talk about social justice? I started to like actually internalize all these things and going, wait a second. There's one chapter in the Quran that's called the women, and that's who it's for, but it's actually for men to understand how to deal with their women. And so, like, even just reading this book from this objective standpoint and going, what's in it for me? What's actually in it for women? And I think that's when I really, college years is really kind of what drew me into more of the agnostic phase of going, you know what? I don't think organized religion is for me anymore.
Yeah. Can we dive into that a little bit? For those who aren't familiar, the part of the Quran that you're speaking about, I know there are many different interpretations of it, but I'm curious to hear your perspective from the lens that you were looking through at that age where you are going into college, you're learning about religion, you've experienced or seen some sort of sexism or misogyny in some type of way. So what does the Quran say about women, and how did you previously interpret it, and then how did you interpret it after you learned more in college?
Yeah, I think honestly at the time as like a teenager growing up, it really just for me it was more like trying to I think I just continuously made excuses about everything I was reading. You know, there's a verse in the Quran that does say that men can marry up to 4 women. Sure, it says like that they all have to be treated equally and stuff, but just the fact that a man has that right, but a woman does not have the right to marry 4 men. And when I even asked something like that, it would be like, well, why do women need to marry 4 men? They're the ones that are having children. They're going to have children with that one man anyway. It was just a weird explanation. And I was like, wait, but so what? Like, I just couldn't understand even things like, that, you know, if a husband calls a woman and she says no, that angels are going to curse her till like she apologizes and then goes back to her husband. So like, and this is specifically for sex.
I was just going to ask. Okay.
Yeah, and so like even reading that, and that's like that comes from a hadith, which is the Prophet Muhammad's sayings. And so the mix of Quran and hadith, I think oftentimes as kids we don't really read them in a lot of detail. We start to read them more in detail as we're adults, and I think that's when we really start to question a lot of things. And if you've had some of that upbringing of being able to look at two things and actually go, yeah, both of these things can be true at once. And it's sort of a deconstruction process, right? I think that's really what started to help me kind of pull myself out of Islam and go, okay, like, let me look at this in a different way. Let me look at it from a feminist lens. Because if I'm just looking at, is this equal or not? It's not. Even in the Quran, that there's things like you can divorce women, but they have to spend like 4 months in this waiting period. And it's purely around just if that woman gets pregnant, then the man can like actually take his child, or that he can say, like, oh no, that's my kid. It's all built around like just women's reproductive systems and how we procreate, and that like women are a tilth and you can go unto them as you want. And this is like a directive from Allah for men. And so it's like, wait, but what about me? Can I can I do that too?
Hmm.
And there was never that other side of it. There was never anything in it for women. I kind of felt like women just had to shut up, just listen, that you had to just follow the instructions that you were given by your parents, by Allah, by Prophet Muhammad, and that was it.
Yeah.
Like you didn't have a say in anything.
So all this is really interesting, and I admittedly have never read the Quran or the Hadith, so I'm
Yeah.
leaning on my
Okay.
guests for these answers.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I see in the comments, this isn't true. Islam raises up the women, or they praise the women, or women are supposed to be beautiful creatures, or whatever it is. And so where is that disconnect coming from?
Yeah, I think honestly, like I thought exactly the same things before too. It really does, because you're conditioned and indoctrinated from a young age to believe that this is that one true book and there's nothing better than this, whether it's for men or for women. And for women, especially for girls, we're taught to believe that Islam is a religion that helps protect women. And that's why there's rape going on in the world, because they're not Muslim and they're not following Islam,
Oh,
which is bullshit, obviously. And also being taught that everything that's written in the Quran or Hadith, those are meant to protect women, and that men are capable of doing things. And so it's up to the women to do all the things to protect themselves, whether it's being covered, though that's for women's protection. It's never like, wait, can we actually shame the shamer? Or, you know, not blame the victim, but actually
Yeah.
blame the
The
men that are going to be
perpetrator.
doing these. Yeah, exactly. The heinous acts that happen, it's because someone's motivated to do it. It's not that because I'm wearing t-shirt or I'm wearing shorts that's going to happen. We start to internalize and uphold that patriarchy within Islam, thinking that this is how I'm going to protect myself. And Allah has made this beautiful religion for me, specifically being a woman. And so if I just follow this, I'm going to be okay. But it's really not. Like that's not how the world works, right? Like it amazed me that I could be in the US and the times that I snuck out and wore a dress or wore shorts without my parents knowing, that I could be out at a party and like no one did anything. Even in those instances, I was like, nothing is happening. Like I'm actually testing this out right now.
Mm,
And there are no men around me that are like doing anything. Sure, there's always going to be that disgusting men that do catcall or harass women on the street, but majority of the times you look around in the US, women are running in shorts. We're at the beach, they're in bikinis, and you don't see anything like that happening. So it's like, why is it that I have to cover myself in this bubble and in this religion, but everyone else is walking around freely without any sort of fear?
mhm.
For me, it was like, I want to get to that point. It was almost like this FOMO that I was experiencing as a Muslim, that going, like, I want to get to that level of freedom where I can just walk around and do whatever I want and not be controlled by these like religious purity culture rules about what I should be doing with my life, to what I should be wearing, to whether I should be working or not. Even that was like a huge issue, right? Going to college was a huge issue because it was like, okay, this is just so you could get better marriage prospects and you'll get a better husband down the line.
Wow.
It wasn't for me. And even being born and like raised, and then like the minute I felt like I got my period was when suddenly all these talks about like marriage started, and I'm like, I'm 13, I don't want to get married,
Oh
this is
my god.
insane. But I think that really tripped me up too, because I was just like, I'm such a young kid, and it's like it's already. I was beginning to think that like, okay, I needed to get married by the time I was 18. So I was like preparing myself for that. And I'm really glad I didn't. I ended up going to
Yeah.
college and actually learning something.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit more because also being in the States, that's not common. I mean, it does happen, of course, young marriage, even
Yeah.
child marriage in some cases. I mean, we've covered it on our channel, but being in the States, it's a lot more uncommon and it's a little bit harder to get away with. So,
Yeah.
especially when you're around peers who that is not on their brain at all. And so you have these parents who are like, "No, let's get you married." So what was that whole process like? What were you going through? Were your parents coming to you and saying, "Oh, we're thinking of this guy or this guy"? What did that look like?
I don't know. This aunt in our community just told us about this guy, and we want you to like, maybe like we can talk to his family. So it's like this constant. My parents just continuously trying to look for somebody for me and going like, here's this picture, here's this resume, and I was like, I don't. I was just trying my best to hold off on getting married as long as I could. Because I was like, if I can just give this excuse of me being in college and I need to work and I need to like actually finish my degree, I could maybe hold them off a little bit. And I think they were like, okay, if you graduate or once you graduate, we're just like the next step is getting married. And it was just a constant fight, constant battle, like going, no, wait, I want to work. I want to work. And honestly, midway through college, I actually started failing because I was like, what's the point? If I'm just going to get
Mm,
married in the next 2 years, why do I need a degree? Why do I need to finish college? Why don't I just like quit now and just actually just get married? And I'm honestly, I'm kind of glad that I didn't. I mean, I'm glad that I graduated with a degree and also brought my GPA up from like a failing to like actually passing.
mhm,
But I'm really glad I did that because I think that that helped me really kind of go, okay, like, yes, I will probably eventually get married. But I started to really kind of put my foot down and go, no, I'm going to finish my degree and I'm going to get a job. Because I think that along those lines through college, I really started to go like, I need to actually think about my own financial freedom too, and really being able to make my own money just so I can do my own things.
mhm,
And that I think really helped me and pushed me to kind of get towards a point where I could just finish my degree and start working. Even that was an issue because it's like I couldn't go to college anywhere outside the state. I had to stay within the state. I had to commute. I couldn't dorm. Even working, I couldn't go outside like probably the 30-mile radius to even work. I had to work within state lines basically. And so there's just all those controls and I had to find ways to just work around them and work through them. Because at that point, it's almost like this roller coaster ride and you're just trying to navigate that. You're going, how do I make this as great of an experience as I can for myself with the time that I have?
Mhm.
So it was almost like college life was my freedom to just do whatever I needed to do to get to that point. And
Yeah.
then going, holy shit, I'm going to get married soon.
Yeah, what is the religious reason for that? Or is it a religious thing? Is it a cultural thing? Why do they push you to get married so young?
I think because honestly, the Quran, Hadith, even culturally, women are just kind of seen as like, okay, we're the procreators. We're the ones that are going to have the babies. And so I think even in the Quran, it starts with like, we've created you in pairs, like a man and a woman. It talks about from like even the women that are talked about in the Quran, it's like always a mother or a wife. It's never really like she was a leader. She did something. She led this like it's never like that. And so you're kind of indoctrinated from a young age to always think about women as like I call them like the ummah incubators. Ummah means community, the Muslim community. So we're like perceived as the ummah incubators because through us we're going to grow our ummah, right? Like the more kids women have, the bigger Islam gets, the more Muslims join, right? So even from that perspective, there's like a little bit of like, not a lot of pressure on women to have kids for some of those same reasons. There's never an instance that I've read in the Quran or Hadith that really kind of talks about like, what's it like for women to kind of lead or women to work. There's nothing in there.
Mhm.
So really, I think that's really what kind of continued to like hit me and go, how come we don't talk about this? How come like prophets, none of the prophets are women? Why is that? Why can't we lead a whole entire like community of people? Why weren't we chosen as messengers? And it's like dumb questions that you ask within the religion, right? Because you're trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
But I think I kept seeing instances of that. It's like, okay, but why can't women lead the prayers? Why can't women do the call to prayers? Why is it always a man? And even hearing like the call to prayer at home, and in my brain, the first thing I would go like, oh, there's that fucking man again. Five times a day that would go through my mind.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's the little things, right? That it just keep popping up and keep
Yeah.
popping up, and it's you have to keep quieting that voice of reason, quieting your critical thinking, because if
Yeah.
you don't, then you're just gonna start to see, you're gonna connect all of the dots, and it's gonna force you to deconstruct, and a lot of people aren't ready to do that. You
Right.
mentioned that you found that thing in high school, and then you're like, "Oh, I'm just gonna pretend that didn't happen." I totally did the same thing about Mormonism. There was this huge thing that I was like, "They did what now in the temples?" And then I was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna pretend that didn't happen," because I wasn't ready to deconstruct my whole life. It's
Yeah.
honestly, it is a privilege in some ways to get to the point to be able to deconstruct because some people are too busy, like, they can't uproot their entire lives. They can't
Yeah.
afford to lose their family or their community or their
Right.
jobs sometimes or their housing. So it is a really hard thing. And I want to talk about your college experience in more depth because I think it's important for people to understand what were you actually learning that was incongruent with your religion and your morals that were starting to become clear when you were learning these things in college.
So I remember my first Islam class, and it was like kind of like a Islam 101 type class. And I was like, oh, easy A, I got
Yeah,
this. Turned out to be like one of the hardest classes because I was like, oh shit, I have never really learned like history and like never actually like
right.
because you learn everything so subjectively,
Uh-huh.
right? Like the rules and regulations and don't do this, do this. You learn how to pray, you learn how to read the Quran, but some of the historical stuff, you don't actually get to read some of that. And so it's almost like there's like gaps within your brain when it comes to some of that like historical stuff too. And so my first Islam class, I'm sitting there and my professor was a Muslim actually. And hearing him say that whatever was written in the Quran or Hadith, because they were not actually written during the Prophet's time, the Quran was like curated and put together like 20 years later. So he was like, these are stories that were passed down from one person to another that finally eventually made it into this book. And the minute he said stories, it like honestly, I felt like my brain exploded because I was like, I've never heard that. I've never heard someone say these are stories. You always hear it's fact, it's the truth, it's this is God's word. You know, you can't change it. These are all things that were written because they're passed down through the prophet and like they're sacred. You hear all that stuff. But the minute I heard stories, I was like, wait, what? These are stories, right? And so knowing that like I had read so many storybooks, like fictions and nonfiction books through my childhood all the way into college, I was like, okay, this actually makes a little bit of sense that like, yeah, these were stories told in the, 7th century that eventually got written down by a bunch of men and then passed down year after year. But then I kept going back to, wait, a bunch of men just got around and put these things together? Like where were the women? Where were like the women that were actually like maybe also part of the group that were recording some of this stuff or learning some of these things, but not really mentioned? Or you don't really learn about them even through your childhood. Even in college, starting taking Islam classes, I was learning about like Sufism, which is sort of this mystical side of Islam, and really finding suddenly this very loving sort of side of Islam where it was like this whole new perspective that I'd never learned before. And it was, like you read like a Rumi poem and you read all the works that were done kind of during that time by Sufi poets, and it's so much more about your oneness with God. There's a loving sort of relationship that I'd never. It was always a fear-based relationship for me
Mm,
with Allah, and so suddenly learning about this like love relation, I was like, wait, what? I can have this loving relationship with God too?
that's an option.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that definitely helped me go, okay, I started to feel like I needed to think about Islam very agnostically. Like, sure, I've been raised with one interpretation, but it's open to many interpretation. And I think there's just too many powerful voices that maybe told me that I needed to only learn about it one way. And I think that through college too, I'm taking classes about feminism and going, that's when those questions started to pop up. Why weren't any of the prophets women? What was so special about men that not a single Abrahamic prophet was a woman? Why were all the imams at every mosque men? Why couldn't women do that same thing? And like then going, why were they held back from leadership positions? But then there's things in the hadith that say like, okay, when women lead, they cause corruption. I'm loosely translating that, but that's really what it comes down to is that women are seen as not trustworthy. And that's what we're also learning from the Quran and hadith. Like the literally Prophet Muhammad said that like women are less intelligent and they're less religious. And that's why you're constantly seeing women in the terms of wives and mothers, because it's almost like they need to be taken care of by men and
Oh,
that men are superior.
hold on. Women are untrustworthy, but it's their responsibility to keep the men from hurting them by covering everything head to toe. Make that make sense.
Yep. Right, exactly. But of course, your Muslim brain's like, of course that makes sense. Of course. Allah is so amazing. Like he protects me. This is why he tells me to cover up. So like men don't harm me. Or that this is why I'm being raised to be a good mother and a wife, because eventually like Allah's gonna ask me what my role was in this life. And I need to be that really amazing wife. And because it says in the Quran that like men are a degree above women. And it goes into what the I'm losing like the exact wording, but like it's sort of along the lines of they're financially supposed to take care of women, and that's why there's all this information in the Quran about like when you get married, make sure you give the dowry to the woman, and like there's all these things in there too, because it assumes that women don't work. It assumes that women are not going to be able to like financially be free. It assumes that women are never going to lead. They're never going to be the decision makers, and so of course, I'm going to be like a lot of women are indoctrinated with that inherent patriarchy and to uphold it and uphold being that really great, perfect Muslim woman and pious woman that's going to like, she's going to be the one that holds her husband to being a better Muslim too. And so even watching my parents grow up, my mom like assumed that role for herself as well. And so it was just like seeing these dynamics between like what women were told to be and then how they presented themselves in real life. It really, for me, I was like, I don't want to be that. Now that I've like steeped in American culture, I'm like, shit, I don't want to be that. Like, I wanted that individuality that I was seeing so much here. When we come in with this sort of collectivism, and especially being immigrants, like we sort of tend to rely on each other too. But that freedom and that individuality was really something that I realized I was going towards and I didn't have. And I think that's something that like we see as a privilege as well, right? That you can kind of make your own decisions and choices, whereas women, generally girls, our decisions are made by our parents, by the elders in our community. And it's always marriage. And then the next step is babies.
Hmm. What were you seeing in your home when you look at your parents and their relationship, and you said your mother was uh, essentially trying to be the perfect Muslim woman and wife and mother? Do you feel like you looked at what they had and realized you didn't want any part of that? Did she seem to conform well? Did she like that role?
I'm not sure if she ever like voiced an opinion about whether she liked it or not, but I think she saw it as her own duty to just be that woman.
Hmm.
And I think that's often the case with a lot of Muslim women too, that like they're raised to see that as like that's what they do.
That's the only option.
Yeah, exactly. Like you either conform or you're just bound to hell. And so I think for my mom too, like seeing her, she took care of us, like me and my siblings. She took care of my dad. She took care of the food, everything that had to do with sort of that home environment. That's her role. But like for my dad, it was making the money and bringing it home. And that's it. He didn't need to get involved in any of the home stuff. Like that was her realm. Whereas my dad's realm was like outside the house. Even seeing that of like my mom just being stuck at home all the time, like I didn't want that. And especially as a kid, when you're growing up in the US, you see like there's so many women that are teachers. There's so many women that are like even in the government, right? And I'm saying so many, even though we're not even perfect here in the US. But to me, my perspective was there was nothing back home. There weren't a lot of women that you see in leadership positions or even working or even just traveling by themselves. Whereas here, it's like my mom had to travel with my dad. I always had to travel either with my brother or male cousins. I could never like go out by myself. And so there was seeing her kind of play that same role. I think for me growing up, I was like, I don't want that. I want my life to be different.
Hmm.
I do owe it to the American culture, right? Like I think US a lot of democratic countries get a bad rep for that. Like apparently Western values are only for non-Muslims, whereas progress, secularism, all these values are just as valuable for us, right? Like they're not solely white people values. If I
Hmm.
could just put it really bluntly, like it's, and I think that's what we are raised to believe, that like any form of freedom is not for us. That's just kind of what modern Western people do. They're the non-believers. They can do whatever they want, but they're going to pay for it later. So we have to protect ourselves. So even just that notion of trying to get yourself out of that thinking that like apparently if I do anything that's closely relevant to or related to progress is bad.
Right.
So just even like it's such a hard thing to get out of, right? Like that mindset.
Being in a non-Muslim majority country and feeling like these privileges are not for us, they're only for the white people.
Yeah.
Did you feel an immense amount of pressure to be sort of an example to those around you to try and convert people in any way?
I don't know if I ever thought like I needed to convert anybody, but I do remember sort of shaming people for being not a Muslim or feeling very special about being a Muslim. Even like I remember even looking down at my Hindu friends or my Jewish friends or Christian friends, because you're raised to believe that you are the most perfect religion, you're following the most perfect religion, you're the most perfect religious person, and anyone else outside that just isn't with it. Like they're not legit. They are hellbound. And so like you try to hold on to that perfection. And then anyone else you see, you're sort of like you're judging them, you're hardcore judging them. There's definitely some people that go to that extent of like trying to convert people. I guess I never really did that because I just loved the fact that I was around like diverse people.
Mm,
I love the fact that I was in the US, and like I think that maybe made me feel special even moving out of my country and moving here. I think as a kid made me feel really special that I finally had the chance to be in the US when so many people didn't. So I wanted to avail that. I wanted to actually like be American. Obviously, down the line as an adult, I realized I don't need to be an American. I can be myself and be American at the same time, right? Like there's a little bit of picking and choosing of who you want to be. And I think that's something that we don't really get growing up Muslim. We don't get a choice.
Yeah.
That's really what happens is like you start to lean into making decisions and choices for yourself. And really that's really what kind of sets it apart.
I think that's a really interesting point that you just made, that you wanted to be American even though you clearly were American, just doing it in a perceived different way, because America is a melting pot of so
Yeah.
many different cultures. But of course, you have this, I guess, social or cultural identity of America being a certain way, especially
Hmm.
when I've interviewed people who did grow up in the Middle East or other countries, and they're like, "Oh yeah, America is just full of these heathens, and they're crazy, dude. Wearing shorts is it's out of this world." While I can agree that America has done some wild things that are not, like, I'm not
Right.
advocating for, I still think it's interesting that that's the perspective. And so in your mind, you're like, no, I'm not American because I'm not wearing shorts, or I'm not wearing tank
Yeah.
tops, or going out with friends and doing all the things I want to do that feel, I guess, culturally American.
Yeah.
So, what was your mom's reaction when you start pushing back on all of this stuff? You are drifting away. Does she know you're drifting away? She must have been really worried for your salvation at that point.
Oh my gosh, yes. I think generally my siblings, my parents, like everyone was really worried. I think my parents were really worried that I would just get married to like a white guy and would like not be Muslim anymore. One of their fears came true.
Oh no.
The fact that I like am not a Muslim anymore.
Yeah.
But I think for them it really kind of I think they were just really upset with me all the time because I was pushing that limit constantly. And so, for example, if I would go, like, after begging them to go, and this is college, I'm living at home. Oftentimes in the American culture, everyone's dorming. They're like, after 18, they've left their homes. Meanwhile, here we are, still living at home, still trying to navigate that Muslim bubble. I had a car, but what I was told was it was just for point A to point B, that I go to college and I come back, or I go to work and I come back. But of course, through that time, I was like, oh, I have late classes, but
Mm,
I'd be hanging out with my friends. I have a project, but I'd be hanging out with my friends. And so, like, there's always these excuses that I would try to find to, like, actually do the things I wanted to do. And it was like really innocent stuff, like hanging out with my friends, going out for dinner,
yeah.
watching a movie, going to a concert. Like, it was very normal things, or even dating. Even that, I didn't have any, there was no way that I could even do that because that was a no no as well. And clearly being told, you better not be hanging out with boys, or that you better not be hanging out with any men around you. We better know who you're hanging out with. And so I would sometimes come home at like midnight, and that would be a big deal. If I came home later, it would be a big deal. Like the chain on the door would be on, so I couldn't even get inside the house. There's definitely times where I had to deal with these things and then getting yelled at, shamed, guilted. We're going to send you back home. We don't know why we moved you here. We were better off back home because you wouldn't be doing these things. Just constant this like shaming and guilting, and just being told that like I wasn't good enough and that I was ruining my own future by trying to be more American. So that was interesting too, is that hearing that apparently me going out with my friends was an American thing. It wasn't just like a normal thing that anybody did.
Mm,
So I think that was just constantly being held against these rules and regulations. But really, at the end of the day, it was just all about control of my mobility and where I went. And then you kind of see, like in Saudi Arabia, there's, you can't travel. You can now without male guardians, but like you couldn't travel without male guardians. And I think there's still that culture there. You heard those horror stories, but like we actually like experience these in our own homes too, which is why like through my doodles I've said things like there's like Islamic regimes, but they're in our homes and in our countries. That Islamic regimes like Iran, the control and the fear that they use, those versions are in our homes too. And that's what we're trying to fight
mhm,
constantly. And then I think that's what we're trying to fight through our lives too, of just going like, how do I just get an ounce of my own decision making into this? Like, I'm my own person. Why am I not being seen as that? And
mhm.
I think that's what continued to just kill me on the inside. And really, I mean, I do remember having very suicidal thoughts too through this time. and feeling like, what kind of life is this that it's not even worth living? Like, if I have to just do everything that they're telling me to do, or if I have to do everything that the Quran says, what's the point of me even having any sense of consciousness? And it's just, yeah, like there were definitely very, very dark days that I went through of just sitting there on a prayer rug, praying to Allah that, like, I wish He gives me a disease or, like,
Wow.
helps me to commit suicide. Like, even thinking things like this.
Whoa.
Um, and it was really, I mean, it was really scary. And obviously, there's no such thing as mental health, right? Like, your mental health is okay. You just need to pray more. So, even being told that, like, if something's bothering you, you're shit out of luck in that point too, that, like, you can't really get help for it. Your only help is Allah. And I'm really grateful that from that college time onwards, really, I met my current ex-Muslim husband, and I feel like he and I provided each other that therapy that we both needed.
Mm.
And that's been just a beautiful thing to have. And again, like, feeling that privilege of not a lot of folks are able to find ex-Muslim partners, and I'm really grateful that I did. And both of us are atheists, and both of us have been able to talk about our journeys in a, like, much more in-depth way. And he's learning about what it's like to be a woman. I'm learning about what it's like to be a man in that space, because yes, we're both experiencing a lot of this shit, but he understood a lot better what it meant to actually be a woman and the double marginalization that happens with us within our own communities.
Yeah, it's really beautiful that he's wanting to listen and hear what it's like, because it is it is hard for someone who hasn't been through something to truly understand it, but the fact that he's willing and open to hearing your experience, I'm sure is so healing for you, because if it'll give you that voice that you've been looking for and give you the opportunity
Yeah.
to be front and center and say, "Hey, I need you to look at me and understand me." I wanna know how you guys met. Were you already done with Islam, or did that come later?
Yeah, I was still sort of in my agnostic phase. I wasn't praying, I wasn't doing much. I would, like, even if my parents were like, "Oh, go pray," I would just go into my room and not pray. Like, there's definitely things that I was doing that I think there comes a point where you're just, like, so done with everything that you don't even care anymore, right? Like, I'd gotten to that point in my life, and so still making excuses to get out of the house. I have to work, I have to travel, I have to do so, just trying anything possible to just get the heck out of the house. And, like, I remember my parents going, like, "This is not a hotel. You can't just come in and out of this house." And it's like, but they didn't realize that that's the environment that they had created a very unsafe environment for me to even be there,
Mhm.
that I couldn't be myself. I couldn't be, even being told to, like, lower my voice, right? Like, not laugh out loud, not yell,
Really?
not scream. Even voice is controlled. And I think it it's so insane that right now in Afghanistan, they're passing laws that say, like, women can't sing and women can't talk to one other women. Like, so that's why I'm like, dude, these Islamic regimes are in our homes and in our countries, because it's like we see these microcosms of it in our own homes. And then you see what the government is capable of doing in other countries as well, in Muslim countries.
Mhm.
So I met my husband online, which is great, right? Like, the internet really changed the world for ex-Muslims, because we were finally able to find each other online and really find community online when there's such a fear of being ex-Muslim or being an atheist, or even, like, just even saying that, like, I'm not even sure if I believe in all of this, right? Like, even if you're just kind of in that agnostic maybe phase, can't even say that out loud because you're just so scared of the repercussions, the fear of consequences. Because I for sure knew that, like, my parents would probably stop talking to me. They would probably deport me back. They would take my passport. I didn't hold anything. I knew they were capable of doing any of those things if it got to that point. And so, just really grateful that I found my partner. He turns out he was South Asian as well. Like, it was interesting because I didn't really have to divulge that he was an atheist or anything like that too. I just said, like, "Oh yeah, here's this wonderful guy." And he had talked to his parents, my parents talked to his parents, and, like, we kind of did that thing, even though we'd been, like, together for some time, had our parents talk, and they got along. They had no idea that we were both ex-Muslims or atheists.
Ooh, sneaky, sneaky.
We kind of snuck our way into this relationship. We snuck our way into having our parents talk to each other. And yeah, And we finally got married. And I mean, everything was fine. But I think it's really interesting that even now we're living a bit of like the closeted lives where our parents don't really know everything about us. There's definitely family members that don't know everything about us either. So interesting if any of my family members end up watching this, hi.
Wait, hold on. Would this be kind of like a coming out video showing, I mean, this is the second one that you've done, right? Showing your face. So do they not
Yeah.
even know that you're
Yeah.
fully out and speaking out and all?
No. Nope. Nope.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, I'm honestly just done being scared, and I'm like, you know what? This is something that I really hold on to very dearly. I'm really just happy and proud that I made that decision to A, make my own decisions about what I wanted to believe and not believe, and then B, make my own decisions about who I wanted to spend my life with. And then that decision to even start Haram Doodles was really after years and years of going like, do I write a book? Do I don't know, like I even was like, should I do like a comedy show? There was just so many things that I was thinking of, but I finally was like, you know what? I'm actually going to go back to my childhood dream and childhood love for drawing. So as a kid, I would draw a lot. Like I was always just doodling on my notebooks, on papers, and I had stacks and stacks of paper and crayons and color pencils and stuff underneath my bed. And I like that was my favorite pastime. But I think the minute I hit puberty is when my parents were like, "Stop! The minute you die." Allah is going to ask you to breathe life into all of your drawings of people and animals. And so this is haram. You can't do this. You are sinning by drawing these things. What's interesting is that that's why Islam leans into just really intricate designs and stuff, because in Islam, it is haram to draw animals and people. So, which is why you can't draw the Prophet, for example. And that's why incidents like Charlie Hebdo have happened because people have dared to draw Prophet Muhammad and there's been consequences. I've done that too through Haram Doodles. I've drawn the Prophet. I've drawn a bunch of different characters. I've drawn Satan. But I think that gave me a lot of freedom to be able to actually like draw the things that I wanted to. And honestly, that's why my Haram Doodles look like they're kids' drawings because I never got the chance to actually take art classes to a point where I can actually hone my skills and actually gain that experience. And so what I did as a kid is what I'm doing now, and that's why my doodles. There's been so many times where people are like, "Are you a teenager?" I'm like, "No, I'm actually a grown woman."
But I think they're great. I think they're a self-expression. It's something,
Thanks.
I mean, you get the point across that it doesn't have to be this insane, artistic masterpiece to be able to connect with someone.
Yeah.
It's part of who you are, and I think they're awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's funny when people are like, "Oh, you're an artist," and I'm like, I can't call myself an artist
Yes,
even
you
now because I'm like I'm
can.
not trained.
Yes, you can. You are
I
changing
might be
people. You're
creative.
changing people and touching their hearts through something that you made with your hand. Like, you're an artist.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I know. And I think that's been the really cool thing is like hearing from so many people of just how much those doodles have meant to them. Even hearing recently, someone reached out and was just like, I'm a lesbian ex-Muslim, and you have no idea how much your doodles help me feel seen. And even just hearing that is like brings me overwhelming joy because I knew
Yeah.
that this is the type of stuff that I wanted in my own journey out of Islam. And I think those are the things that I'm creating of going, I'm using my personal experience, but I'm also using a lot of the experience of other ex Muslims. I collaborate with them too to help create these doodles. Um, but really, like, I think just that sense of belonging that these are bringing, I think that's the most important thing for me,
Yeah.
that I can continue to do that and that a silly little drawing could actually have so much weight and meaning to it is like, yeah, I don't think I understood the power of that until like 2 years later. And now I'm like 8,000 followers. And I'm like, how did that happen?
Yeah, but that's something I wanted to mention too. From my perspective, your drawings feel like a soft landing. They're not so harsh and in your face to where it would make someone become defensive by looking at them. I feel like
Yeah.
looking at what you're drawing feels like an open invitation to maybe question some of your thoughts, beliefs, whatever it is that you are deconstructing currently. I think it feels like a safe space to do that, because sometimes if you put up a meme that is clearly blasphemous and clearly just so in your face, sometimes people put up that wall of, oh, this is
Yeah.
obviously something trying to tempt me, or it's blasphemous, or whatever it is. Name your adjective that they say about people who leave the religion and go to hell. So I think it's really easy for people to ignore it. But when you have something that does feel more childlike or does feel softer, it allows people to look at it with a little bit more of an open mind, in my perspective and opinion.
Yeah, I think, and I've heard that too, of just like, I think I was experiencing through through the pandemic. I kept seeing a lot of like content that was being posted like through, for example, like the ExMuslim subreddit. But there were a lot of like photoshopped memes and a lot of like video content. I was like, I didn't really care to do the video content much because I was like, it's not about me. I really wanted to make it about Islam itself, especially when ex-Muslims constantly hear that we are Islamophobes
Mm.
or that anything you say against criticizing Islam is seen as Islamophobia. I think that Islamophobia takes our right away to criticize Islam for the really harmful ideologies that end up hurting people. At the end of the day, people are sacred. Humans are sacred, not the ideas.
Mm.
And so really that's what I wanted to do was like actually present these ideas in different ways that helped people see them in a way that maybe they hadn't seen before. So for example, I created a stupid chart that's like literally like number of prophets in Islam. And it's like a pie chart and it's like all men, but like zero women. And I think someone actually said, like, where are you getting this data from? I'm like, this is like obvious data. You don't really need to do a lot of data crunching for this.
Yeah.
You don't need to be like a data scientist to like actually understand that there are no prophets that are women. So like even presenting information that way, I've heard from people going like, where are you getting this is like false data. And I'm like, no, this you can literally count these things on your hands
Uh-huh.
and be able to decipher that there's reasons why we leave, but one of them is definitely not we're sinning or that like we had bad parents. We leave because of the misogyny and the violence and the sexism and the homophobia that like we're all experiencing and that we're all hearing. Even the anti-Semitism is massive. You grow up anti-Semitic, and so that's my goal is to ensure that through these doodles, people get the idea that like there are things in Islam that we can talk about and that we can deconstruct them
Mm.
in ways that really kind of focuses more on Islam itself. And my goal is not to like put Muslims down, but it's actually to show how Muslims think about things, how we're actually taught to think about things.
Yeah. In a way, you're holding up a mirror, because
Yeah.
when we grow up with these complicated ideas and the mental gymnastics we have to do to make it make sense, and then when you show it in a very simplistic, here's a pie chart, it turns on that critical thinking where they're like, no, that can't be right, because all these other like math equations going on in their head, like, no, 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 there's got to
Right.
be carry the one. Like, what? And so when you're like, no, this is it, and they have to really look at it objectively, it's very confronting, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even like thinking about how as a kid, these doodles really kind of helped me, like that was my safe space. It created this sort of like for me, it became a way for me to just forget that like I was living in a Muslim bubble, that like I could use my imagination in different ways. I could create something that like never existed before. And I think that was such a powerful thing for me, even as a kid, to realize that. And now that I'm actually creating all this content that never existed before, and it's suddenly now people are actually getting a sense of they feel heard, that like they felt understood, they felt validated, they
Mhm.
felt valued, connected. Like there's all these things that I'm hearing from ex-Muslims, and I'm like, holy shit, this is exactly what I would have wanted on my own journey. And I would have wanted these things to be there too, that I could like passively. And I think that's the other thing. A lot of us are closeted. So we have to look at things passively, right? Like without volume, like without anybody looking, without, someone finding out. And so having these doodles that are just like one and done and that you can take an idea, draw it, and then someone can actually see it and it doesn't involve anything else except to just look at it and be able to like understand it. I think that really kind of felt very powerful to me.
It is.
I'm in awe of all of the folks like you, like Apostate Aladdin, like Infidel Noodle. There's so many ex-Muslims that like I looked up to because they were so brave and courageous to be in front of the camera and be able to talk. I don't know if I felt that brave when I initially started. I wasn't going on videos with my camera, but really I think that changed after meeting ex-Muslims in person and really kind of going, you know what, I'm kind of done being scared. It's okay. This is something that I'm doing and it's helping a lot of people, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that moment in Norway? Because I think it's a really big deal. And it's a cool visual too.
I was asked to be on one of the sessions in Norway. So there's an event called Celebrating Dissent where a lot of the ex-Muslim organizations come together to create like a 2-day conference. Ex-Muslims, humanists, atheists from around the world actually come together. And so it wasn't just an ex-Muslim, it was a majority ex-Muslim, but there are others there too. And so I'm there, and this is the first session. And so, like, I'm like literally shitting bricks at this point, going, holy shit, like, I'm gonna be on stage. I have to like talk about this stuff. And I had never done that. I hadn't done that yet. And so I got on stage and I was wearing a mask with the word haram on it. Cause I was like, okay, I'm just gonna wear a mask. I'm not gonna like show my face. And honestly, just being in that space with so many ex-Muslims, and it felt like honestly like a family reunion of a sorts. Like it just felt so cool to like actually meet these amazing people that I had read about, or I'd watched their stuff, or I'd like read their content, and suddenly I'm like meeting them face to face. It honestly gave me a lot of courage to say, you know what, the things that I'm doing really do mean a lot. The fact that I'm even here and on stage right now, sitting with these like incredible women, like I'm sitting with a talented musician and artist who like was arrested in Iran because she was singing. And so she like had to flee the country. I'm sitting with this like activist who like started the UK Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, like just insane. And I'm going, holy crap, I'm this little like just doodler sitting on the side, you know?
Doodler. I'm just a doodler.
But in that moment, I really just let go of my fear, and I'm sitting on stage and I just took my mask off. I threw it on the ground and I said, I'm done.
It
I'm
gave me
just
chills.
done being scared. And at the end of the day, I think I can also say that because I live in the US and there's laws that protect me and protect freedom of speech and freedom from religion, as well as freedom of religion. And so I know that a lot of us can't do that, can't say that. There's a lot of ex-Muslims out there that still live in Muslim countries or really strict Muslim homes. And for me, just being able to reach them through my doodles is like, yeah, that's what keeps me going and keeps me doodling for sure.
Wow, such a cool moment. It gave me chills. So awesome. I wish I could have been there. And I think that's where you met Apostate Aladdin, right?
I did, yeah. It was really amazing meeting him, meeting Secular Spirit, Zara K, Mariam Namazi. There's been just amazing relationships that have formed through that, and I think really understanding that all of us might be taking very different approaches in how we speak about Islam, but I think all of us are really kind of coming together in a more collective way, because at the end of the day, no matter how we talk about Islam, what brings us together is the fact that apostasy and blasphemy are punishable by death in Islam. And oftentimes Muslim countries, they are like actually enacting these laws, and they are actually imprisoning people, and they're actually like executing people for these like decisions that they're making. And really, we have to continue to speak up, and we have to continue to fight for that world that we want, right? Like, we want that world for ourselves. And so we can actually speak up to make sure that we can create that and build that world for others as well.
Yeah. So all of this is a huge deal. You coming on and sharing your face. Do you think this is going to, I mean, really, if your family sees this, do you think this is going to affect you in a really big way?
Probably. I'm probably going to lose relationships. There's going to be some consequences of that. But I think I'm at a point in my life where, can I curse?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't give a fuck anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so done being scared. I'm so done being controlled of like in that fear. I think a lot of us really just kind of also like at that conference we talked about how tiring it was to talk about this too. That like there's really we get to these points in our lives where we're like, why can't we just change this world so that like none of us are hurt, none
Yeah.
of us are harmed by religious ideas that really should not be dictating how other people live, right? So when they're like in the government, when they're like passed through policies, we're like everyone else is shit out of luck too. And so I'm grateful that we're here in the US where we have that freedom, but I think we're trying to fight for all the Muslims living in democratic Western countries that don't have that freedom, even within their homes. And we're trying to fight for the people that are living in Muslim countries that like literally by law, they can't do that. And so really kind of fighting those two fights, whether it's at home or in countries. And I think really having that collective, being in that environment with so many ex-Muslims, I think that's how we feel when we're online as well, that like we're all really tied together because all of us are here because we no longer want to be called apostates. We no longer want to be called blasphemers, right? Like we should be able to criticize and challenge any ideologies that are fucky.
Yeah.
When it sounds fucky, it's really fucky, right? You can't ban you can't ban bacon but not ban slavery. Like what the fuck? Like how does that even make sense?
That should be on a t-shirt.
I've gotten so many requests to make t-shirts. It's not like I have to actually start to look into
You
that.
know what? We're gonna chat after this because I'm gonna tell you how to do it. You need to do it immediately. It makes sense. You have the artwork. Hello. Okay, we'll talk about it. So, I mean, I guess I just have to say thank you for being willing to do this because I don't take this lightly. This
Sure.
is a huge deal. I didn't realize this is kind of like a coming out moment for you. And so I feel honored that you're willing to do it on our channel. And
I'm honored too.
yeah, it means a lot. And I think it'll mean a lot to people who are watching who could relate. And I hope that if your family does see this and they watch it, I really hope they listen, not just hear it, not just, okay, she left and taken that information, but really listen to what you're saying and know that you're still a good person. Clearly, you have beautiful intentions. You just want to help other people and make them feel less alone. And I would hope that they would watch this whole thing and have an understanding that you are still a beautiful person, even though you're choosing a different path than they are. And hopefully that would help inform their decision on how to move forward with you in the future.
I hope so too. And I think one thing that I'm like out of all of this, 2 years ago, I helped organize the first ever Ex Muslim Awareness Month. And I kind of did it very purposefully because November is Islamophobia Awareness Month. And so I was like, you know what? We need a specific month for ourselves right after. And so December is Ex Muslim Awareness Month. We've done it 2 years now. This is now going into the third year. And really, it was just me going, I have this idea. Let me just reach out to ex Muslims and see how it goes. And I think everyone kind of like, jumped in and said, let's do this. And I think it really helps support ex Muslim organizations who are raising money
Mm.
and they're raising funding to help do the work that they do, whether it's mental health, whether it's providing support groups. Um, and then it helps get our voices out there a little more powerfully too, because there's a sort of collective action for 1 month that we're just like talking about our stories, talking about our experiences, why we became ex Muslims. I started doodling this series called Since I Left Islam to really kind of show what happens to us after we leave Islam. And so that's been really great to hear really positive stories from other folks too of what is it that changes for them when they leave Islam. And so that's something that I'm really proud of, and that like we're now collectively going into it again in the third year. So, and purposely doing it after Islamophobia Awareness Month, because I was like, you know what, we need to push back on this narrative of Islamophobia, and we need to actually, I actively call out non-Muslim ex-religious folks that do still lean into Islamophobia. I drop comments on their pages to say, stop using this, use anti-Muslim hate, because this is not really helping us.
Right.
So
Yeah. Well, please let us know if there's anything we can do to help support that. I think it's great
sure,
what you're
will do.
doing. And of course, I want to talk to anyone who you want to refer to us. who you've been in contact with, and you know this, it's hard to find people willing to speak out and show their face or even come on with a mask.
Yeah.
It's a scary thing to do. And so for us, we want to help platform people who do want to share their stories, but it's not really just a quick Google search because a lot of people aren't
Yeah.
public. And so yeah, we definitely welcome referrals. So let's talk about you now and how you're doing and what brings you peace and joy and happiness.
Yeah, honestly, I'm doing great. There's a part of me that's still closeted, which is okay. I've kind of learned to navigate that life with my ex-Muslim partner, which is amazing that he and I can both be in that space together and kind of share that and find safety with each other too. There's often times where we go to like family gatherings and stuff, and like the minute prayers start, he and I like find each other, and then we'll walk out of the house and like go spend some time outside. So that's been really nice too. Is that like there's a partner there with you.
Yeah.
Really, right now, I'm just I'm continuing to doodle. I'm continuing to collaborate with ex-Muslims, and I think that's been a really great way for me to really kind of see that these doodles are helping, and also leaning into really kind of connecting more with ex-Muslims and helping share their stories too, knowing that oftentimes LGBTQ ex-Muslims are double marginalized. So like I make it a priority and make it a point to like actually talk to them as well and share their stories,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't often hear their stories as often. So even with women, right? Like a lot of times these conversations are dominated by men, because their reasonings are maybe like logic and like critical thinking and science. Women actually experience that. They experience the religion on a whole nother level. And so really trying to connect with more women as well. And really, honestly, I couldn't be happier in my life right now. Just knowing that I'm doing something that really brings me a lot of joy, and it brings me a lot of joy to connect with ex-Muslims and ex-religious people like you too, and really continuing to work with other ex-Muslims to have a more of a collective and joint action in our efforts as well. So that's something that I'm really proud of, and being able to provide that peer support to others. So
That's so great. And something that you said off camera, I don't know if you wanted to share that, but about your choosing freedom over your body and reproductive system.
yeah, I think that's been really great to finally go, you know what? My body, my mind is no longer Allah's, or it's no longer my parents', it's my own. And I think really having that like self-awareness is something that really led me to my own freedom too. And that's such a joy to be able to like reflect and be able to find yourself, right? Like you finally get to understand what you like and you don't like. You finally get to understand what you stand for and what you don't stand for.
Mhm.
And I think really kind of leaning into being ourselves and being our true authentic selves. And part of that is me taking my mask off. And so I think I'm grateful even for this opportunity to be here and speaking with you. So thank you.
Yeah, of
Appreciate that.
course. I think it is important to know, and I probably should have said this a long time ago, but we're not here to shame people who choose to be modest, who choose to have kids, who choose to be stay-at-home mothers,
Right.
who choose to not go to college. All of the whole point of this is the choice. People who can choose to do
Exactly.
something, and recognizing that people may choose to not have children, and that's okay. So what we want to bring the awareness to are people who don't have the choice, who people who aren't able to get higher education if that's something they want, who aren't able to draw, who aren't able to decide if they want children or not. That's a really big deal. Being pregnant is no
Right.
joke. Giving birth is no joke. Having a child is no joke.
Exactly.
Speaking from experience, 7 months postpartum, and I'm not normal yet. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. So I just can't imagine people who are forced into that position, especially at a young age, forced to get married young. There are just so many things that we want to talk about because it's important for those to realize that some people don't have a choice, and that's what we want to bring voice to are the people who had to navigate through something where they had no bodily autonomy, they had no self-sovereignty. And that's why we always say finding your individuality, becoming conscious, which means just becoming aware of your situation, getting rid of that mental prison, getting rid of that block, having that sovereignty to do things as you choose. And if that does mean continuing to cover your body in a certain way, that's great because you're choosing that for yourself. So I
Right.
feel like I always have to mention that because every now and then we always get those comments of like, "What's wrong with being modest?" We're not saying there's anything wrong with that, but also not shifting the blame. Like if you want to be modest, great, but have the awareness that if a man chooses to do something, that's because he's choosing to do something to a woman who was covered or not covered.
Exactly.
So I think just shifting the perspective in a way that people can understand. We're not demonizing any sort of thing unless we're talking about child brides. I will demonize that all day. But there are
Absolutely.
certain things that if you want to choose to do that, then great. So, yes, thank you for coming on and sharing. This was amazing. It was so great talking
Thank
to
you.
you. And I just need your Linda listen moment, your sassy statement, anything you want to say to someone who's pissed you off, or something inspirational, or both.
Stop using Islamophobia. When you use Islamophobia, you take our right away to criticize Islam. We need to be able to criticize all the ideas that hurt and harm people.
Mm, yeah, that's good. What was the term you said to use instead?
Anti Muslim hate.
Okay, right, because then you're shifting it to the person, not the religion.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And so, really, at the end of the day, it's like, yes, I, as a Muslim, experienced that bigotry and hate growing up here. I was called horrible things in school. And so, but as an ex Muslim, I'm then silenced for speaking about the harm that I actually experienced within Islam. And
yeah,
so, we have to be able to, like, giving us the power back to actually be able to criticize and challenge the religion and religious ideas. Um, but unfortunately, when people say Islamophobia, it takes that right away from us instantly.
yeah, that makes sense. Great. Well, thank you again. Do you have any other final thoughts before we go?
No, I think this is awesome. Yeah, this is really great. And thank you for bringing a sense of belonging to ex-Mormon women, especially too. I'm sure I've met a lot of ex-religious folks through even the doodles, and it's really cool that there's so many of us that have very similar experiences, right? Like, yes, the ex-religious community is not a monolith, but I think there's a lot of things that we experience, especially the control and the fear and that
Yeah,
sort of fear-based upbringing. And really, I think finding that freedom and finding that sort of self-awareness is really, just rewarding at the end of the day, and being able to like talk to other ex-religious folks that honestly get it. You
mhm.
you get it. Like, you understand, even from that ex-Mormon perspective, you get what it's like to be an ex-Muslim. So
Wow,
I
thank
appreciate
you.
that, just sort of being in community together.
Yeah, I think there, like I said at the very beginning, there's always going to be this huge gradient of experiences and the way people are internalizing things, the way the rules are imposed upon them, but ultimately the patterns of control and manipulation, fear and shame are all the same. And so, yes, I
Yeah.
think there's so much that we can relate to together as someone who was in that mental prison and that thought control. So, everyone, go follow at Haram Doodles on Instagram. They're awesome. Go check it out. And we'll put all the links in the description. Leave those words of encouragement down below. We love seeing those comments, positive words for our guests. It just means a lot to us and to them, of course. And if you want to support the podcast, you can become a patron at patreon.com/cults to consciousness. We are shifting over to channel memberships very soon, so keep your eye out for that. If you want to get some merch over at close-to-consciousness.com under the merch tab, oh, we should do a collaboration. We should
Yes.
we should do a collaboration with your
Let's do
designs.
this.
Okay, we're gonna talk after. We just announced our next C2C vacation. If you want to come on a very non-culty vacation with us, we're doing our second one. The first one to Costa Rica was amazing. We put out a video recently about everything that we thought about it, some video clips from it. But this time we're going to the Oaxacan coast of Mexico, very beachy. We're going to do a lot of boat tours, snorkeling, seeing the sea turtles, coffee farm tours, waterfall swimming. It's going to be amazing. If you want to come, link in the description. It is now available to book. And if you like this video, I'll link two more down here below. You're definitely going to want to check out our other videos with some incredible people who have left the Islam community as well. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.